If Resident Evil The Final Chapter is the virus to bad editing and bad camera work within an action sequence, then John Wick Chapter 2 is the antivirus. It is the cure. Honestly, this could be a very simple movie review because if you still haven't seen it yet, all I have to do is say a few things and you'll know right away whether you're going to like the film or not. Did you like John Wick? Did you think it was an awesome action film with a badass played by Keanu Reeves? Did you think the action sequences were really handled extremely well in an age of action films that have a lot of cuts, jump cuts, and a lot of shaky cam? And this was a fresh take on that where it wasn't shaky cam and you actually got some fluid action sequences? And for a sequel, do you just want more of that action done better and crazier? Well, look no further. Go see John Wick Chapter 2 if you haven't already done so, because that's really all I have to say, honestly. But if you want to stick around and hear what I actually thought about the film and what the film is about, then yeah, stick around and listen to what I have to say. Well, John Wick Chapter 2 starts right where the last one left off. And I saw John Wick pretty recently because my mom was home and she wanted to see a few movies with my sister and I. And so we picked out John Wick and The Gift, and she saw them both for the first time. And so I had seen John Wick recently and totally forgot he didn't get his car back. Well, John Wick Chapter 2 rectifies that, where the first action sequence is him trying to get his car back. And after that whole rigmarole is done, someone from his past comes back looking for John Wick to hire. Unfortunately, he's done a favor for John Wick, and John Wick now has a blood oath with him, and so he has to assassinate someone. But things twist and turn, and backstabbing is involved. To make a long story short, eventually someone puts an open contract on John Wick, and now a lot of assassins want to get that money and want to kill him. All while John Wick is trying to enact his revenge. Now ultimately what I just said kind of gives away most of the movie, but I tried to keep it vague enough so you can expect the twists and turns and enjoy this movie for what it is, because honestly, one of my favorite movies so far this year. Granted, we're only through 2 months, and I haven't seen all the movies that had a limited release in December and a wide release in January, because 4 of those frickin' movies didn't come to any of our theater. So again, it's really early to say that, but John Wick was an awesome action film. Now obviously it's not an Oscar-worthy film, it's not a really great movie, but it's a really great action film, and sometimes that's all a film needs to be. Scratch that, it's an incredible action film and a really great action sequel. For starters, Keanu Reeves is back as John Wick, doing his own stunts, being a beast, a total machine, and he is amazing in this role. Keanu Reeves is a really great action star, and when he's playing as John Wick, you really do care for the guy. As the movie went along, I just kept thinking to myself, poor John Wick, and sympathizing for him because of all the crazy things that happened to him and the backstabs, and he just wants to get a normal life. He just wants to be out of the assassin game, and everyone just keeps pulling him back in. Yet at the same time, he does some really brutal kills, and just he's unstoppable. It's really weird to actually sympathize for that kind of character, but you really do. Yeah, he's killing people with pencils in this movie, and I'm still thinking, aw, poor John Wick. All the characters from the first one that survived the first one are still in this again, whether they have small scenes or bigger scenes. Even that cop that asks John Wick if he's working again has another little nod in this movie. I like seeing these characters again. I liked being thrown into this crazy world. And to be honest, I liked all the newcomers in this film as well. Our main antagonist of the film, the person that brings John Wick back into this assassination game, is played by Riccardo Scamarcio. Is Italian. Now he might not be as fun as the Russian mob boss in the other movie, where he knew what John Wick was capable of and was warning his nephew, his son, or his son? Yeah, his son. Yeah, this bad guy isn't as entertaining as the first one, but he's a slimy scumbag. He's kind of like Theon. He's that character that you really want to die in this John Wick movie. And for that, he was the perfect villain for this film. Ruby Rose is in this film, and she plays his right-hand woman. Honestly, it's not only the best movie I've seen her in this year, because she's been in 3 movies. She was in Triple X and Resident Evil. But she is my favorite character she's played out of those 3 characters. Second best would be Triple X. I haven't reviewed that movie yet, but I thought her character was fine in that movie. Probably a little too edgy, or at least trying too hard to be edgy, and that could be annoying to some. But she's completely forgettable in Resident Evil because she was among the cast of forgettable characters you will never remember in a year's time or even half a year's time. I liked her in this film. She was this mute, or either deaf or mute, or just mute. And I think she did really good. Now, her fight sequence with John Wick I wish was better. It started off really great, but I won't spoil anything, but it became a little disappointing, I guess. I mean, it really started off cool, that's for sure. But you know, once John Wick grapples you and gets a hold of you, you're as good as dead. It's just a matter of time. And so her fight sequence with him was really quick. Promising start, but really quick. Lawrence Fishburne is in this movie, and he's a blast to watch. But my favorite new character of this franchise, because there's definitely going to be a third one, that's for sure. There better be. But my favorite character of this new cast is Cassian, played by Common. He's a beast as well. Out of all the people that John Wick fought in the first one and in this one, Cassian is the formidable foe. He is amazing. Whenever John Wick and Cassian fought, it was brutal and the best fight sequences in the film. The fight scenes between Keanu Reeves and Common were some of the most entertaining fight sequences in an already amazing action film. And I really like the conflict between the 2 characters. Now, it's not a conflict that is new to action films. It's a pretty overdone conflict between 2 characters. But it's one that's done solid enough and entertainingly enough that it was one of my favorite parts of the film. Now, when it came to John Wick and Cassian, my favorite sequence with the 2 characters in the entire film was probably the silent pistol fight that they do in the subway. Now, I won't spoil anything, that's as far as I'll go, so that if you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and if you haven't seen it, then you'll know what to look for. Now, if you like the world building that the first film did, it's expanded more in John Wick Chapter 2. To be honest, it feels like the whole world meets Game of Thrones because the assassins and there's higher-ups, there's a high council, and each one has their own territories in the world, and groups of assassins have different parts of the world. It's pretty crazy, honestly. It almost gets to a point where it feels like the only people in the world are assassins. Now, probably one of the most important things about this film, whether you're going to like it or not, it has the same style of action. Now, for the action fans that don't like a lot of shaky cam, that don't like a lot of super jump cuts, like Resident Evil: The Final Chapter, then John Wick Chapter 2 is another breath of fresh air, just like the first one. Because even though it has a different editor and a different cinematographer, it does feel like the same sort of action sequences, just done a little bit bigger and longer and more of them. Yeah, this is a pretty non-stop action film. It only slows down a little bit at the beginning, but then once it gets done with a certain assassination, it just never slows down. Now, it doesn't feel like it ever gets overbearingly fast to the point of just exhaustion, at least compared to other non-stop action films, but it's highly entertaining. Now, at the beginning with the car chase, there is a lot of cuts, but honestly that makes sense, and it does it in a way that is fluid and you understand what the hell is going on. This isn't Resident Evil: The Final Chapter where you can't even tell who's punching who at times. This film, when it does get to the fight scenes, there is cuts, there's definitely cuts, there's gotta be, but there's a lot more fluidity to them, and there are long moments where it's just these 2 fighting, these other characters fighting. Even the gunfights itself has fluidity to them. Again, if you like the action sequences in John Wick Chapter 2 is the same, just bigger and badder, without going over the top, mind you. Yeah, this movie is essentially what most action sequels are. It's just a bigger, badder version of what you expect from the first film. And in that way, there is a little bit more fun to be had with this film. There is some over-the-topness, but it never gets to the point where it feels like something like Fast and Furious or Triple X, where it just gets into stupidity level. Yes, there are definitely going to be moments where you're like, wow, I can't believe that actually happened, but it's still grounded enough where you feel like, hey, it's not over the top, it's not stupid. Probably the most over the top things in this movie are the amount of assassins just in the world of this movie, a few of the fights that happen in public, and just the amount of people that John Wick kills. Especially in the sewer sequence, or the catacombs, or whatever they're called. That sequence was awesome. It felt like a video game just by the amount of enemies that were coming at John Wick and how many he killed. But in a good way. Now, if some of you were moved by the first film because of the emotional depth within it, and how there is a reason for John Wick to go ballistic, there is a reason for him to want to kill people for killing a puppy and stealing his car, there's definitely something more to John Wick, and you're asking, well, what about John Wick Chapter 2? Is there in this movie? Yes, there is. Now, it's not as surface level as the first film, it's not as emotional as the first film, but there is something deep within it. I mean, something of John Wick is destroyed. You probably know it from the trailer. His house is destroyed. But you gotta think that, hey, this represents his life as a normal person. This is where all of his stuff is. This is where all of his wife's stuff is. And so there is emotional attachment to that. And again, it's like the bad guy taking away his normal life and throwing him back into the world of assassins. And there's definitely a duality in John Wick where he can become this beastly person, this brutal killing machine, almost like Jekyll slowly turning into Hyde, but being our main hero and the person we like in the film. So I definitely think there is some emotional depth in this movie, there is some meaning to it, there is something deeper than just your plain action film, but it's less so than the first film and a little bit more under the surface in this film as well. So that might be a little bit more of a disappointment when it comes to this film. I do want to talk about a little bit of the CG in this film because I feel I have to, especially after seeing it twice and noticing this. For one, the CGI blood, I have no problem with that in this film. It's actually done really well. But there are times when the backdrop, when the green screen does look a little off-putting. And I never noticed that the first time I saw it. But when I saw it with my cousin the second time, I did notice some things. Like, for instance, the first fight that John Wick and Cassian have, and eventually leads to these stairs where they're tumbling down all these stairs. And so then they're fighting on a balcony, and you see all of, I believe they're in Rome, I think that's where they went. But you see the city in the background. And I don't know if it was green screen, or if it was just a backdrop, but at one point in the fight, I was looking at some of the buildings, and they look so two-dimensional, that I wondered, is that really a green screen? And if it is a green screen, is it just a photo? It looks so flat. I know it's a very little thing, but I did notice it the second time. Maybe it was just how it was looking, or maybe it was one particular building, but there's one shot where I was like, this looks a little off. I do feel this is more fun, this is a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, this is a little bit more self-aware of the crazy world that this movie is in. Now, it never gets to the point of self-parody, it never gets to the point where it's making fun of things, and it never loses its grit, which is really surprising. This is one of those films that kind of has self-awareness to it, is having fun with it, has some dark comedy with it, as well as some legitimately funny things about the over-the-topness and the crazy world, still being genuinely funny, while still having brutal, gritty, R-rated fun. I really like that about John Wick Chapter 2. In the end, guys, I had an absolute blast watching this film. It's not a perfect film for me, but I had a really fun time. Saw it twice. I would love to see it a third time if my mom comes home and wants to see it, because she saw the first one and just learned that the second one is in theaters. So if I see it a third time, I would gladly do so. And to be honest, I might like this film more than the first one. I'm going to give John Wick Chapter 2 4.5 stars. Yeah, I know, this sounds like a perfect review, this sounds like a review that I should give 5 stars to, but there is something about the story that isn't as engaging as the first one, even though it still is engaging, and it's not a really perfect, great film, Oscar-worthy film or anything like that, but then again, it doesn't need to be. And honestly, it is higher than 4.5 stars. I mean, when I did my average, including my personal feelings for the movie, as well as the more critical average, it averaged out to be 4.74 stars out of 5. But because I don't do quarters, I have to round down, and so it's 4.5, just below Lion for me. Those two films are my favorite films of 2017 right now. So, have you seen John Wick Chapter 2? What'd you think about it? Was it a great action film? Great action sequel? What'd you think? Go ahead and comment below. And if you haven't seen John Wick Chapter 2, what is the best action sequel you have ever seen? And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews of 2015, 2016, or 2017. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was just my opinion.